people gather medical data. There's a lot of regulation around medical data, HIPAA, of course, being the one that everybody knows about. Privacy Act in 1974 is still also an issue. I want to do research, and to do my research, I need this data. Well, but that data can't be given to researchers without the permission, of course, of the people who it's gathered from. Unless, of course, it's completely anonymized, and then nobody knows who it was gathered from. But when we store this data in the database, it's not anonymized because we have to, it has to be related to their patients so their doctors can see their records. So we have two competing needs. We have a need for positively identified data that a doctor needs to treat his patients, and completely unidentified data and that researchers need to do cancer research or whatever. So what happens now, somebody goes into a database and they scrub this data down so that the only thing that's there is stuff that's not personally identifiable, and that's the data that the researchers get. Well, it's great, except it's a static moment in time. They don't know, for example, I've got a record from a guy, here's some stuff, a treatment was done to him. Here's that same guy 6 months later. Well, I don't know it's the same guy, and I'm not allowed to know it's the same guy because then it could be personally identifiable. So we can't tell them it's the same guy, but they need to know what the result of that treatment was at the research side. Now, are there ways to make that happen? Sure, they are. They're all human-centered and they're all expensive. What if I have a data record that's encrypted right at its core, and the key the doctor has to look at it gives him access to the things the doctor needs to know, and the key the researcher has to look at it gives the researcher access to the things the researcher needs to know, but not to the things that would make that personally identifiable data. In other words, a variable access to that same record of data. Is that possible in a database right now? It is. In some databases, there's cell level security. I've built it. I built it in Apache Accumulo back when the NSA was still maintaining that thing. I worked in military intelligence, and compartmentalization in military intelligence is everything. So can we do it with current software? It's possible to do, but that security is intrinsic to the software, not to the data. Thought makes it intrinsic to the data. The data knows who's allowed to see it, as opposed to it being the software that knows who's allowed to see the stored data. So now it's not shackled to any one app. It's not shackled to any one silo. It's shackled to its identity and nothing else.
And how do you imagine authenticity being proven? So let's say that, I have a bunch of nuances that contain data that I deem to be health records and I want to monetize it. How does somebody know that it is real health records? Is it related to an origin where it was generated from a trusted source that is verifiable?
Sure, that's probably the simplest way to do it, right? Because when that data is when that nuance is registered, it's registered by an address basically on the blockchain. And we can say, well, all of these records are published by this address, and then they were transferred using using the transfer mechanism. Here's the transaction on the blockchain where it was transferred from that creator's address to this receiver's address. Nothing else in between there, right? Now that creator has translated or transferred to that receiver the ownership of that data. Now that receiver can decrypt the parts of that data that they're supposed to be able to decrypt. And I mean, it's chain of evidence maintained inside the blockchain.
Right.
Obviously, nobody can go and tamper with the contents of the ledger. Could somebody tamper with the contents of the data? Sure. But one of the things we can do is register that checksum, right? Here's the checksum. If the checksum doesn't match, the data was tampered with, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so an organization issuing that trusted data might be a research institution or a doctor's office or something.
Sure, yeah. Here's Johns Hopkins publishes a page. Here's the place you can come. If you want cancer research data, here's a data set that you can get. That data set's contained in a nuance. You buy that nuance. Oh, there you go. You got that data set.